Hello and welcome to another episode of Osgoode Community Chronicles, where we explore the rich history, vibrant events, and remarkable stories that make up the Osgoode ward and surrounding communities. In each episode, we dive deep into our local heritage, drawing from the meticulous records and research of our local historians and families. These invaluable resources allow us to bring you stories from the past, ensuring that the traditions that shaped our community are shared with future generations. Whether you're a lifelong resident like me, or a newcomer, join us as we tie our fascinating history to the present-day version of our beloved region of Osgoode and surrounding communities. I'm your host, Tracy Daviero. I think I completely forgot to mention something last week. Well, I don't think. I know I did. When I do these episodes, I just go with whatever materializes in front of me. I have notes and I have ideas of what I want to do each episode. But I just sort of follow the simplest track as, I start to do some research and some reading and I pull information. Last week led me to the Saunders family. I didn't purposely pick them. I was just going through my stuff and they stood out. So I did the episode on them as I do. And once I had my plan in place, I realized that Bob and Irene's house on Lyon Street went up for sale the very next day. Isn't that a strange coincidence? These strange little connections seem to keep happening with this podcast. When I used Jeff Brownlee's story and picture for the Lighthouse episode when he was in grade 4, I haven't talked to Jeff in ages, and it ended up being his birthday a few days after I published the episode. Or a couple of weeks ago, when I happened to be reading Elizabeth Stewart's tribute to Arloa Ferguson, the podcast was actually published on November 26th, and that happened to be the exact date that Arloa passed away. Neat little connections. I didn't plan anything like that on purpose. And so the Saunders house being for sale this week is kind of interesting. I guess it's sort of like buying a white Honda. All of a sudden you notice all the other white Hondas on the road, right? But it's neat to me anyway. You guys know that I look for those little connections all the time. Anyway, thanks also to Mona McLennan Saunders from Russell, who got to hear last week's episode via Cheryl Cooper and mentioned that her husband, Gord Saunders, he's Harold and Amy's son, was from the Beckwith Saunders line. And she said that he recalled visiting his Osgoode cousins on the weekends with his parents when he was younger. When I searched his obituary, the photo that came up reminded me very much of Mr. Bob Saunders. They are definitely related. Gord passed away in 2022. He was a Russell Lions Club member for over 50 years. Thanks again to Cheryl for sharing the podcast and for Mona for tuning in and sharing her connection. So for this week, we will have our news and our events calendar as usual. Our business segment is about the Manotick Medical Center. Our historical segment features the history of Long Island. Our Community Voices segment is about Dr. O.B. Wilson. And as usual, we'll wrap up with our mental health moment. Let's get into it. Every week on the podcast, we'll share some of the local events that are taking place in the area. So many people doing wonderful things. Be sure that you get out to support them. Don't forget to get to Christmas on the Farm at Stanley's Old Maple Farm. It's every weekend from Thursday till Sunday from now till Christmas. You can step into the magic of their Christmas village. You can take a holiday stroll for a date night with friends, or pick out your perfect Christmas tree. Check out their website for details and to buy your passes. We are officially on our break from Sens home games. With the World Juniors in town, the Sens will mostly be on the road, and I told you last week, I'm kind of pleased about that. It's been a long haul of really close together games, but what an exciting game against the Penguins on Saturday. It was an overtime win, and we grabbed a wild card spot for now too, so well deserved. These guys worked so hard. We totally have faith in our team. The Manotick Mariners did lose to the Pogon Falls Rapids this week in Low, Quebec. Lots of shots by both teams. It was wild, actually. 40 for Manotick and 35 for Pogon Falls. It sounds like maybe it was a goaltender's battle. Final score of 4-3. The Mariners do remain in number 1 spot in their division, but now 3rd in the conference behind the Rockets and the Mustangs. Keep it up, boys. Their next home game is December 28th, just in case you were wondering. That is pretty much it on the events calendar. There aren't many other events going on this week, well, because of the holidays, of course. But that's okay, because there has been a lot going on lately. I'll just say congratulations to the Kempville Brewing Company on their opening. It looks like a really nice place with craft beer and a sort of upscale pub menu. And Erin Wigney is over there now. Many of you will know her from the Red Dot. We are going to come by soon to see you, Erin. And I actually also wanted to shout out the Linden Leaf in Oxford Station, which opened I think in the summer, and still is getting rave reviews for their German-inspired cuisine. Not sure how it will compare to Ulrike Mueller's amazing cooking. My bestie Sabina Mueller had me over for dinner many times at that table, but when we go, I will be sure to let you know if it's up to her standards. Next Tuesday, of course, is Christmas Eve, but I'll still be posting an episode for you. But I'll still wish you a Merry Christmas today, just in case you're not going to tune in till after the holidays. And that is our events calendar for this week. In this week's Business Spotlight, we're talking about the Manotick Medical Center. We didn't have a doctor in Osgoode when we were growing up, and this is where we went to go see our doctors. I feel like Dr. O.B. Wilson must have been everyone's doctor. I've come to find that his name was Orville Badham Wilson, but he always went by O.B. or, to his patients, Dr. Wilson. I remember he didn't say much. I have glimpses of memories going to the medical center. He was very straightforward and to the point, but you don't really need a friend when you go to the doctor. I also remember the large waiting room, white, with all the standard magazines and toys to keep us busy and, the parents occupied as well. I recall only a few exam rooms all along one side of the wall or one side of the building, and the very big reception desk, or at least it seemed big to me. Downstairs was the pharmacy and the x-ray area. Of course, their Manotick Medical Center is not there anymore. The building is, but it has moved down the road. The business has moved down the road to the building above Shoppers Drug Mart on Midge Owens, which I guess technically makes it not on Long Island anymore, but for a very long time, that's where it was. So let's talk about how it came to be. Dr. Wilson wrote a brief history of how the Manotick Medical Center came to be that I'll share here, along with a later update. This excerpt is from the original 1989 text in the Rideau Township Archives, and it is in the publication A History of Long Island, Manotick, 1827 to 1997. And Dr. Wilson wrote this himself. I commenced practice in Manotick on Monday, June 2nd, 1955. I had purchased a small bungalow behind the Manotick Public School on Elizabeth Street. The house was later to become the Presbyterian Manse, and for some time now, enlarged and updated, has been a private family residence. That house was one of quite a few small homes being built in the surrounding area by the late George McLean. The lots he built on were purchased from the late Honorable John Bracken. Mr. McLean finished off the basement in our new home at his own expense to accommodate the general practice of medicine. He did it with the verbal instruction that I would pay him when I could. It was an encouraging gesture, and I shall always remember it. In 1957, to accommodate an enlarging family, I traded houses with a Mr. John Doby and moved into 3 West River Drive, where I still reside. Again, Mr. McLean came to my aid and finished off a series of basement offices that had an entrance apart from the residence portion of the house. It was an extremely efficient setup, and the practice grew. In 5 years' time, I was very busy. In those days, Manotick was a police village that included Long Island. The land north of Bridge Street was in Gloucester Township, and that south of the street was in Osgoode. The portion that was in North Gore Township lay west of the Back Rideau Channel and extended north from Henry's Pond to County Road 8, which was the southern border of Nepean Township. There was an arrangement of tax transfer when the council included Dave Bartlett, the late Douglas Carroll, and James McNeil. The yearly budget was $15,000. In 1974, Rideau Township was formed, following the creation of regional government about 1969. Manotick, including the complete island, then became part of Rideau Township. While all that was going on geographically and politically, the general practice of medicine was becoming very much a full-time job. By that, I mean one had to be on call 24 hours daily the year round. It became increasingly difficult to break off for family holidays, 2 weeks yearly, and a postgraduate refresher courses, also up to 2 weeks yearly. The rest of the time, there was no escape. One dealt with the emergencies that are now immediately transported by ambulance to hospital emergency departments. Hence, availability was mandatory. I therefore began to think in terms of getting the practice away from my house. Also, I became keen to create a physical plant and administrative setup that would encourage other physicians to come to the community and practice under the one roof. I envisaged a central filing and nursing service that would function whether or not the physicians were present. I wanted something that would live on regardless of what medical person power came and went. One opportune day, I approached the late George Bracken and with the site problem, and he quickly assured me on behalf of the late Honorable John Bracken estate that he had suitable land. I wanted 1 acre, but I had to take 2.65 acres. This was an unplanned challenge, but Mr. Bracken was forthright, patient, and considerate. The necessary permission to build was obtained with the help of Dr. Taylor of Osgoode, Reeve of Osgoode Township. The year was 1972. Building designer Mr. Will Watson, son of the late Harry Watson, and now of Merrickville, was approached. I had planned the medical clinic floor layout and counted on a bungalow-style building. Watson had much more vision than I did and argued for a 2-story structure that would allow for rental space which would help pay the upkeep. I therefore agreed to change the building plans. The medical clinic floor plan was my own creation, as was the roof design, for better or worse. As construction proceeded, and before I had given much, if any, thought to the tenants of the remaining space, a Mr. McLaughlin approached me about the creation of a medical laboratory facility. The area was outlined in plan, and in due course the Manotick Medical Laboratory Service came into being. In this computerized machine age, most of the tests are done now in a main Ottawa laboratory. One has witnessed phenomenal improvement in laboratory analytical ability over the past few years. The building contractor was Cyrus Moulton, who had built the initial phase of the Manotick Arena. He and his partner attended the official opening of the Manotick Medical Center on December 17, 1972. The Reeve of Osgoode Township, Dr. Taylor, cut the ribbon, and the minister of Manotick United Church, the Reverend Stuart Hewlett, now of Southminster United Church on Bank Street, Ottawa, blessed the event. Friends and longtime acquaintances were in attendance, and it was a very satisfactory celebration. Many of us still remember it very well. The Manotick Pharmacy came into being around 1958. Up to that time, I was obliged to dispense medications, and it was becoming quite time-consuming and almost a separate enterprise. Again, Will Watson was brought into action, and he and the late Mr. Tilford Gordon, Tilfy, a pharmacist from Pakenham, built the Manotick Pharmacy on Main Street with living quarters on the 2nd floor. Mr. Art House purchased the business 10 years later. He hesitated to move to the medical center, but by the spring of 1973 he decided to move in. The center was therefore fully occupied and functioning. In 1976, Peter Westland purchased the Manotick Pharmacy and as well opened the IDA Pharmacy in the Manotick Mews. In 1975, Mr. Frank Shakursky rented space in the medical center for the Manotick X-ray department. Mr. Connie Moss was his partner, and in 3 or 4 years he became the sole owner. These enterprising people created various outlets for their services in the Rideau, Ottawa Valley. Quality of equipment is constantly being upgraded, and X-ray and electrocardiographic and ultrasound services have been established. Mammography service of high quality has also been installed in the Manotick Medical Center. In 1987, I decided to expand the building and to include a wheelchair lift and to make significant ground improvements. The site plan was completed under the expert guidance of David Egan, with zoning and property lines duly approved. Once completed and functioning, as it was by April 1988, I thought the time had come to sell the center. I was, however, very uneasy at excluding the physicians who occupied the top floor and practiced family medicine along with me as a unit. I had very definitely never dreamed of it being owned by anyone but physicians. The interest mounted, and on September 1, 1989, Mr. Moss of the X-ray department and Doctors Koroniak, Katak, Ruparelia, and Puxty became the new owners. Nothing else was altered, just the ownership of the building. To summarize the story of the Manotick Medical Center and its development, it merely grew along with the rest of the community. While it was an O.B. Wilson idea, it is plain to see that many aspects of its development merely fell into place. Many people helped to bring it about. George McLean has been mentioned. George Bracken served a catalytic role, to be sure. Will Watson egged me on into building more than I had originally planned. The tenants emerged and were vital in making it work. Mr. Connie Moss planted ideas that one was able to follow, and the extra land originally purchased became vital in sustaining expansionist concepts. The place was blessed with a loyal staff. That, of course, was essential. The center was designed to attract physicians, and at last a compatible group had come into being to carry on a service that was started 35 years ago. Before that, the late Dr. Leach had practiced medicine here for over 50 years, and one merely had to carry on a fine heritage and tradition. One is grateful for the opportunity to have done so. And that's from Dr. O.B. Wilson. The torch was passed in 1992 when Dr. Wilson retired, and he passed it to Dr. Anne Fillingham. She actually grew up in Manotick, and Dr. Wilson was her family doctor. After high school, she left for university and chose medical school. During her third year in medicine, she spent time in Dr. Wilson's practice. But after graduating in 1988, she decided to travel and do locums while figuring out where she wanted to be. One day, she called and asked Wilson if she could come back and take over his practice. He wasn't quite ready to retire yet, but he definitely agreed. In 1992, he did retire, and she took his place, an under 30-year-old female physician. That changeover in Manotick was significant. According to the Medical Publication Forum, the Association of Canadian Medical Colleges reported that in 1993 and 1994, a major turning point happened in medical demographics. For the first time, more women than men were enrolled in their first year of medical programs at Canadian universities. There were 51% women enrolled that year. At the same time, medical school enrollment was falling, reportedly. More than 100 English language medical school places were eliminated in 1993 and 1994, and 30 more were expected to disappear the following year. That added up to 14% fewer people earning a medical degree at Canadian medical schools compared with 1985. The Forum, the publication, indicated that these numbers have all been realized through the reductions of male enrollment in medical school, fewer male doctors. When Dr. Anne Fillingham took over Manotick Medical Center, there were 3 female doctors and 3 male doctors sharing Dr. Wilson's extensive family practice. And she remembers starting out, there was an imbalance of seniors to younger patients. At first, there was a big rush to check me out, she recalled. I saw so many older people for the first 3 months that I found I was looking forward to anybody that came in with a baby. She found some other pressures with coming to an existing family practice as well, in the community where she herself grew up. Many of her patients were family friends of her parents in a lot of cases, which sometimes made for difficult interactions. Some of the older men didn't want a young female doctor, but the young mothers and families did. And of course, the patients who missed their old doctor sometimes came at her with, "Dr. Wilson never did this," and she had to get very comfortable reminding them that Dr. Wilson was no longer there. Dr. Wilson did well to tell his patients that he had known Dr. Fillingham all her life. He actually delivered her as a baby, and that he was comfortable enough not to work with her, but to completely step away when she came around. A big change from when he had begun his practice, as you heard earlier. I never went to Dr. Fillingham. By then we had our own doctors in Osgoode, but I do remember Dr. Wilson and the others who bought the building in 1989. Many of the others who were his initial partners, Koroniak, Katak, Ruparelia, and Puxty. Those names are very familiar, and I know that members of our family and our community went to them for a long time. Since Dr. Wilson began his practice, many things have changed. The hands-on care that family doctors used to provide, including obstetrics to general surgery, is now considered outside of their purview. The family doctor is now more of a patient's advisor and advocate and less a medical caregiver. Dr. Wilson and Dr. Fillingham remained friends. I get a glimpse of the TV show Virgin River when I think of the old doctor and the young female doctor. And you know I'm always looking for connections. Well, here's one for you. Dr. Anne Fillingham's married name is G, and she is local racing cyclist Derek G's mom. Derek, of course, competed in the Tour de France in 2024 and finished 9th overall. Connections are so cool, right? You're welcome. And that is our business spotlight for this week. This week's historical segment, we're talking about the history of Long Island, with source from the publication The History of Long Island, Manotick, 1827 to 1997, by local historians Catherine Carroll and architect and heritage conservationist Barbara Humphreys. This book is a very interesting read of the history of Long Island, as opposed to Manotick Village, and as you will hear, it's divided into 3 parts. We are going to cover phase 1 in this podcast episode. I want to start first with a portion of their preface in the book. So these are their words. The decision to write the history of Long Island was based initially on the realization that while there were numerous articles and stories written about Manotick, all touched rather lightly on the island itself. The island's history is a classic example of the transformation of a rural area into a thriving community, owing its origins to the establishment of water-powered grist and sawmills. While many towns and cities in Ontario share this background, not many underwent so much change in such a short period as the Long Island section of the village of Manotick. The first phase of development began in the vicinity of the Long Island locks. The construction of the Rideau Canal in 1827 to 1832 led to the establishment of a small settlement on the eastern shore. While not on Long Island itself, which then had no link to the mainland, this settlement was a major factor in the development of the second phase, which centered around the mills at Manotick, built in the early 1860s. The third phase began in the period following World War II. In the course of these 3 phases, Long Island has moved from an entirely rural community, consisting largely of the 12 original land grants registered in the 1850s, to what has sometimes been termed a commuter's paradise, with the number of houses leaping from 15 or so in the mid-19th century to over 700 by 1990. Only a few vacant lots remain on the island, with many commercial conveniences in the mainland area of Manotick, ready access to the recreational facilities of the Rideau Canal, scenic properties of convenient size, large areas of parkland, and virtually no commercial development. The island has managed to retain some of the charm which drew the first residential development to the area. Neat, eh? In the rest of the preface, the authors cite their sources as the National Archives, Parks Canada, the Registry Office, the Township of Gloucester, the Rideau Township Archives, the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, and mention several people by name: Dora Stamp, David and Betty Bartlett, Margaret Stinson, Muriel Buck, Robert Simpson, Mary Henderson, Coral Lindsay, Valerie Lister, and Greg Hutton. And they also mention a survey of residents taken in 1989 as a major source of information. They conclude with, without a doubt, the most interesting and often the most revealing history of an area lies in the memories and experiences of those who shaped it, rather than in the records of a registry office or other established sources. In this regard, we hope that this present work will encourage others, in due course, to add their stories to the evolving history of Long Island. I wanted to share that bit because it's so different from the standard preface and dedication of many books. It's personal, and you can tell that this book is personal to the residents of the island, and that's why I want to share it with you this week. A History of Long Island, Manotick. A piece of rougher wilderness could with difficulty be found in Canada. A road open through it would greatly benefit the progress of the works. That was a quote, and this was Long Island as described by James McTaggart, Clerk of Works to Lieutenant Colonel John By in his report of 1827. McTaggart had been instructed by Colonel By to examine the proposed route of the Rideau Canal, which was to stretch from Ottawa, then Bytown, to Kingston. Planned by the British government as an alternate water route to Kingston for protection in times of war with the United States, the canal, when completed, linked and made navigable the major rivers and lakes of the Rideau and Cataraqui systems by means of a series of locks, control dams, waste weirs, and artificial waterways. Designed and constructed by Colonel By and the Royal Engineers, the 202-kilometer-long canal, with some 47 locks and numerous dams, was completed in 5 years, 1827 to 1832. A remarkable feat given the local conditions of climate and terrain and the dearth of skilled men, draft animals, and equipment. Long Island, heavily wooded with high banks and bordered on each side of its 5-kilometer length by a series of rapids and varying water levels, divided the Rideau River into 2 main streams. Colonel Bye's plans called for a stone-arched dam and a flight of 3 locks across the deeper East Channel at the north end of the island. Construction began in 1827. A waste weir was built west of the dam across a channel cut in a depression in the contour of an adjacent land. This island, of which only a remnant still exists, was bordered by the Rideau River on the east side and by Mud Creek on the west. The weir relieved the pressure on the dam by permitting excess water to flow to the Mud Creek and back into the Rideau River well downstream. Phase 1. Long Island Village. When work commenced at the site in 1827, the only building in the area was a small sawmill which had already been stripped and was finally demolished with the construction of the locks. However, by the time the canal was completed in 1832, a small settlement had grown up on the mainland adjacent to the locks. In addition to the lockmaster's house, built of stone, there were a few houses, probably built by workers on the canal, a carpenter's shop, and a blacksmith shop. In all, there was a total of about 11 buildings. In 1834, a post office was in operation, and a store and a hotel had been erected. About 1846, a Methodist church and manse were built southeast of the locks on Rideau Road. Anglicans and Presbyterians shared a small log building, the Union Church, a short distance farther south. These 2 congregations also shared the cemetery, the Anglicans on the north and the Presbyterians on the south. This practical arrangement caused a later minister to wonder if there was a similar division in heaven. Residents of the surrounding farmlands marketed cheese, and there was also a small tannery and potash industry. In all, the settlement near the lock showed every promise of becoming a busy village. At this time, there was no bridge over the locks, and the late Mel Rowett, whose grandfather operated a store at the locks until 1859, and subsequently farmed at the north end of the island, relates that it was necessary to ferry the horses and vehicles on a self-constructed ferry when he wished to cross the mainland. In the winter, they traveled on the ice. Nonetheless, it was a busy spot, particularly for the lockmaster. Lockage was on demand, and the only boats not put through at night were the barges. Reputedly, there were only 2 hours in the middle of the night when no locking was done. Earlier, however, all did not go as well with the operation of the dam and the locks. Due to the unstable conditions of the soil at its base, the first waste weir was destroyed by very high spring floods in 1836. The replacement was built a few yards farther downstream, but this also failed and was rebuilt in 1847. When this one was swept away in the spring of 1858, it was obvious that the ongoing difficulties with water control at the site necessitated a redesign of the entire system. The new design called for a construction of a new wastewater weir between the tip of Long Island and Nichols Island, and another across the West Channel some 3.2 kilometers south of the locks, the present site of Watson's Mill. The construction in 1858 of these weirs, which are still in place, solved the problem at the locks, but led eventually to the demise of the adjacent small settlement as tradesmen were drawn to the mill site which developed at the new southern bulkhead. Little now remains of the Long Island settlement. The Methodist manse, now a private residence, and the adjacent cemetery remain, but the church with its hand-hewn timbers was dismantled and moved to a farm where it served as a barn. The Union Church was demolished, but the old cemetery is still evident by the roadside about 100 meters south of Rideau Road. In addition to the manse, the only other buildings remaining from the early days in the area are the home of Mr. Cecil Rowett, located on the northern tip of the island, on the farm purchased by his grandfather in 1860, and the house and barn of the James Mowat farm, erected in 1891 on the mainland, just east of the locks. The original stone house of the first lockmaster has been replaced long since by the present building, dating from 1915. Registered as Long Island Village in 1861, by 1891 the settlement as such had ceased to exist and did not appear on the electoral map of 1896. So that's phase 1. There are 2 more, as I mentioned, and we will cover those in a future episode. Like I said, to me, very interesting history. From the survey, Catherine and Barbara also picked up what they call recollections that they also published in their book, and I want to share a few of those today as well. One of them is from Mr. and Mrs. R.A. Simpson. When we came to Manotick in 1950, the first to buy one of the first 4 houses on Riverside Drive, the only trees were those at the river, mostly mature elms. so that the view from Bridge Street of this new subdivision was somewhat stark. The road was gravel and ended at George Bracken's dairy farm. The land along the west side was a cattle pasture and a wonderful place for the kids to play. According to his obituary in 2022, Bob was often referred to as the mayor of Riverside Drive. He and his wife, Isabella, called Obel, were very involved in the Manotick United Church. He apparently was a bread maker extraordinaire, and his loaves sold for amazing amounts at church fundraisers. He served in the RCAF Squadron 423. An interesting note that I dug up is that in the RCAF Overseas publication, the 423 is the only unit without a nickname. Out of 43 squadrons listed on the page, there's a blank space beside their nickname. Interesting factoid. Obel died in 2012, a full 10 years before Bob, and credit is given to his Dr. Ann Fillingham, for assisting him to stay in his own home until the age of 98. The final 4 years of his life, yes, he apparently lived to 102, were spent at Carlton Lodge. So that is Bob and Obel Simpson. Ray and Betty Grinnell. For a few years after we moved to West River Drive, Mr. Driscoll would cut hay in the fields across from us on the east side. There were no houses across from us, and only one house to the north. West River Drive came to an end not too far from our home, and young people often used to drive there to the end and park. On hot days, Mr. Driscoll would take a break, when our little children would take him a pitcher of lemonade. As a thank you, he would sit them on his knees, and they would help drive the tractor. Ray was very well known in the ski world, first as a skier, winning his first downhill in 1939, and going through the ranks of various ski associations and organizations, including being the national president of the Canadian Amateur Ski Association in the early 60s. He was a director of the Calgary Olympic Development Association as well, and presented Canada's bid to the Fédération Internationale de Ski at Chamonix. He was the first Canadian representative elected to the Ski Council at FIS. He brought biathlon to Canada's sport umbrella and presented Canada's bid for a number of Olympic Games, including Calgary and Vancouver. He helped develop the Canadian Ski Museum and the Canadian Ski Marathon, and was chair of the museum from 1971 till 1987. Obviously, an incredible body of work in skiing, and reportedly he continued skiing himself until around the age 89. Just a love for the sport. The connection for me here is simple. I used to work at the national ski team from 1987 to 1989. I was the national team secretary for the Alpine discipline, and we originally were located at 333 River Road in Vanier. We moved to shiny new offices in 1988 to 1600 James Naismith Drive near Saint Laurent. In that building, all sport associations were merged under one roof, which was really cool actually, even though the drive to work really sucked. But that meant that all ski was finally in one place, and as a result, I got to know a lot of other people in other disciplines. I didn't know Ray, but I certainly heard his name, and saw his name a lot. I didn't make the connection till right now, actually. I have no idea why I didn't know that someone local was so integral to the sport of skiing, but I'm really glad that I know now. Another quick connection, though. Ray's granddaughter, Caitlin, worked at Big Daddy's when she was younger. Yep, with Tony. Her parents, Doug and Elaine, were regulars at Big Daddy's, of course, and then at Kelly's too later on. And Tony got to know all of them very well. Doug actually connected us with our roofer, Rick Luscombe, another Big Daddy's and Kelly's regular. Can you call somebody your roofer when he did both of your roofs, but it was like 20 years ago or more? I think so. Shop local, folks. Thank you again to Catherine Carroll and Barbara Humphreys for collaborating to publish the History of Long Island book, and for capturing the recollections of a few of the original folks who lived on the island for us to share with you today. And that is our historical segment for this week. In today's Community Voices, I want to share Dr. Wilson's obituary because I think it's quite a fascinating one and really lovely. It feels like he wrote most of it himself, maybe except the last part. And if so, then these are his own words about his life. Wilson, Dr. O.B., peacefully on November 17th, 2017, at the age of 96. He was predeceased by the love of his life, Kay, and his sisters Marjorie and Bernice. O.B. spent his early years in Antrim, Ontario, initially on the family farm, and then in Antrim itself, where he helped out at the general store. His formal schooling was interrupted when he contracted tuberculosis, which sadly also took the life of his sister Marjorie. Financial hardship brought about by the Great Depression necessitated a family move to Ottawa West, where he hit on the idea of becoming a medical doctor. Supported by the hard work of his mother and his sister Bernice, he completed his high school education before enlisting in the RCAF in 1942. The ensuing years of radar technician training and overseas posting to Ceylon were formative ones, and their impact was to remain with him for the rest of his life. On return to Canada, he pursued his dream of studying medicine. It was at Queen's University that he met his future wife, Kathleen K. Richardson. A general practice-oriented internship program took them back to Ottawa, and he worked briefly in Kemptville before recognizing a need for medical services in Manotick, where they set up a home and office in 1955. O.B. recognized early on the importance of being available for his patients, and all subsequent practice and lifestyle decisions were based on this belief. He held extended office hours, delivered babies, made house calls, and attended to his hospital inpatients. He followed changes in medicine with regular use of continuing education conferences, audio tapes, and journal reading. Although he wasn't known for a soft bedside manner, his diligence and integrity earned him a faithful following. Always one to plan for the future, he realized that in order to serve the needs of his growing patient population, he would have to expand out of the business of the family home. His dream to provide a local lab, X-ray, and multiple family doctors under one roof was realized with the establishment of the Manotick Medical Center in 1972. O.B. couldn't have done all this without the support of his gracious and loving wife, Kay, who he described as the heart and soul of the family. For many years, she attended not only to the needs of their 5 girls, but managed to answer the busy office phone and keep the practice's financial books in order. She also helped make possible Sunday afternoon family outings and the annual 2-week August vacation. Kay and O.B. made the best of epic family road trips as far away as Florida and PEI, and Rideau River adventures in the pontoon boat are the stuff of family legends. With their purchase of a cottage, Wolf Lake became a favorite gathering place for extended family. Once Doc Wilson retired from medicine at the age of 72, he continued to be a significant presence in Manotick. He was active, often at the board level, and in Kiwanis, Probus, and the Legion, and maintained an active interest in the United Church. When Kay died in 2007, he was able to stay on in the family home into his 90s, until declining health led him to move to Orchardview Living Center. More recently, as his dementia progressed and until the time of his death, he was compassionately cared for at the Rideau Purley Veterans Center. He is survived by daughters Lynn, Janet, Bev, Pam, and Karen, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The family has greatly appreciated the loving care provided at Orchardview and the Purley, and the immeasurable support of community members and family friends, in particular our faithful visitor Stuart Hewlett. O.B. made an impact wherever he went, and he will be missed. And there you have it, a little tribute to a man, Dr. O.B. Wilson, who dedicated much of his life to looking after the health and well-being of the Manotick community. And that is our Community Voices segment for this week. In today's mental health moment, we take a moment to reflect and care for our physical well-being and emotional well-being, I think. In my research this week, I came upon Manotick Health Hub. It's not located within the Manotick Medical Center, you might be surprised, but it is a one-stop shop for physiotherapy, massage therapy, and nutrition coaching all under one roof. The Health Hub is located on the corner of Ann Street and Maple Avenue in Manotick, on the way to Giant Tiger from the Main Street intersection. I know this building because I used to go there for massage myself when Teresa Jane Daly had her practice there. I'm still kind of mad at her for moving out west, but I love to see her when she comes back home, and I don't ask her for massages anymore. Of course, I'm kidding. I love TJ and her husband, Ken. But I wanted to highlight the Health Hub this week because I think it's so important to take charge of your health. And at the Hub, they integrate education and guidance about exercise, nutrition, sleep, and other things into their treatment. It's all in one. And they encourage their patients to actively participate in the rehab that they're undertaking. Their goal is for patients to understand the mechanism of injury, how to help themselves heal quickly and optimally, and how to prevent reoccurrence of the injury. They pride themselves in building a team of therapists that are empathetic and excellent communicators. That sounds like amazing ongoing self-care to me. And sort of in keeping with the Manotick Medical Center premise of gathering everything under one roof, I thought it was a good little shout out this week. Check them out if you're looking for professionals who work with you to get you back to the peak of your health. And that is this week's mental health moment. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Osgoode Community Chronicles. I hope you enjoyed our connections from the past and our taste of the present. I do hope you enjoyed hearing about the history of Long Island, Phase 1. I'll be sure to post some photos from the book on our website to accompany this episode, and also the story and memories of Dr. Obie Wilson and how the Manotick Medical Center came to be. Remember, you can catch all of our past episodes on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can also listen in online at our website at osgoodcommunitychronicles.com and follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram. Don't miss next week's episode, where we'll share more news and events in your area and more stories of families past and present. Thanks again for supporting our snapshot of our local community. I'm Tracy Daviero, and this has been Osgoode Community Chronicles, keeping our rural spirit alive, one story at a time. I'll see you next week.